all of those imperfections and all of those mistakes lead you to learning more about what you don't know, so that you can learn more. And that's going to be a lifelong thing. If you want to be good at your job, then you're going to be learning for the rest of your life. My name is Carmen Lobue. I go by Boo, pronounced like Boo. My pronouns are they, them, theirs, or you can also call me Boo. I identify as a queer, trans, non-binary human who is always evolving and changing. So I'm very fluid in all of my identities. I am Black and Filipino and spiritual. I usually identify as an artist just because I do so many different things. And it's very difficult for me to, at this particular moment, describe in detail the things that I do, because most people don't know what it means to be an artist. So I usually consider myself to be someone that is trying to create something using an artistic medium to reflect the time that we're living in. I grew up in Cleveland, I grew up in New York, and I grew up in Los Angeles. I would say at home, I was very fortunate to grow up with many different types of people, like very multicultural in my family and in my upbringing and the people that my family would bring me around. So that could mean different religious backgrounds, different race, different sexual orientation. I definitely had a well-rounded group of people around me, so shout out to my parents for that. My experience living in LA was very different from my experience living in Ohio, which is kind of like historically been like more of a sundown state, you know? So very conservative, versus when I was in LA, I was around a lot of Latina community, a lot of Filipino community, a lot of Black community, which is very different from being in Cleveland, which is very segregated, and that has its many stressors that comes along with it. And then in New York, I've always felt like this is one of the most diverse, and it's the best place to be in the entire world, I think. I haven't been everywhere, but I think New York is the best, because you have the most amount of queer people. You have the most diverse group of any type of person, food, or art, or profession. You have access to the most of everything in the world. And I think everything moves so quickly, and you're exposed to so many different things, it's impossible to not learn something new every day. So that's why I think New York is the best place. Everybody comes here. All of my aunts are my role models. So they're teachers, they're parents, they have jobs that I don't understand what it is that they do. But also my papa, one of my aunts, they're teachers. So I've been really, really fortunate. My papa was a guidance counselor, a Zen priest, got his PhD in interdisciplinary education with a master's in English. And, so I was always sort of learning. I grew up around a lot of spiritual people. I grew up around artists. There are musicians, plenty of musicians in my life. My dad is a musician. My aunt is a beautiful, beautiful singer. So I think I have a lot of mentors in my life for different reasons, but that could also mean my peers. I think I'm still sort of coming out every day, because sometimes you just are what you are and who you are, and you don't have the language for it. But I would say probably around like maybe 20 is when I came out to my papa. And I still at that point didn't have a word for what that meant, but I was spending all of my time with queer and trans people, but I didn't connect. I just thought people were people, and that we were all open. And, I sort of had this very sheltered viewpoint of what the world could be like. I think because my papa and other family really created that for me. So coming out was not hard, I guess. And also maybe nobody was surprised. I think if I had access or was in like queer spaces, that happened definitely like in my family. Like I have a couple family members who are out, which I'm really grateful to them, even though we don't identify in the same way. Like I think that was like probably my first access point. You know, moving to New York, I was just like a club kid, or I was homeless, and you met other people that were like you and you didn't know why you were similar, but you kind of just, you know, fell into, okay, we're going to share a room in someone's apartment until we find a place to stay, or stay out all night so that we sort of had a place to be, you know, and then find a place to nap during the day. I don't know. I guess my access point became just living in New York City and just finding other people that I vibed with. And a lot of that had to do with like going to the club or going to the park or going to the pier. You know, I also went to school for theater, so I was definitely around queer people all the time. My dad was a musician, so I'm sure there were plenty of queer people. When we were living in LA, I'm sure there were people around. And then I think like as an adult living in New York City, I mean, everybody from all walks of life are around you all the time. Coming up, we wouldn't get like very superficial gifts for a birthday or for, you know what I mean? It was like things that you needed or things that you could learn from. So I think that, and then going to private school for high school really helped, because I went to a prep liberal arts school, and I had the benefit of being around some of the most liberal nuns and sisters you could ever imagine, which tells you a lot. They were just like, look, believe in something, pick something and believe in it. For me, being in that environment and being so open, and then being able to like go to a school that had theater, you know, I was really invested in it, and it had a directing program. So I started there, and then Catherine Hahn came to our high school and spoke to us. And I was like, wait, what? You can go to Yale? You can go to Yale for theater? Like you can, you know what I mean? Like, you know how, like that opened my mind to something that I couldn't even imagine. I didn't know what I was going to do with my life, but I knew that I loved directing, so much so that I went to the dean and I said, hey, we need another directing class because I want to continue doing this. And then that's when I applied for schools to direct. And there weren't, you know, a lot of undergraduate directing programs available at that time, but I was sort of searching for what I wanted to learn. I've had a lot of educational influences, and it always goes back to my papa saying it's important for you to learn how you learn. So my high school also had something called independent learning time. So you could apply for this where we had block scheduling, so you could decide what you wanted to learn, and you're responsible for teaching yourself a class essentially, and then like writing sort of like a dissertation on what you were trying to learn. So I think in that process of learning how I learn and asking myself this question throughout has always sort of been like the train tracks that needed to be laid down so that I can fly. So, you know, Catherine Hahn told me that I can do this thing. So I applied, went to school, didn't have the best experience in an undergraduate directing program. I didn't feel like I was prepared in that environment, being Black, not knowing that I was queer, being at that time identifying as a woman. At that particular point in my life, there were 2 people who were not cis men in my directing cohort that year. And it was really, really challenging because I also didn't really see someone doing what I wanted to do in the field, and I didn't feel like I had access to that. I had to get really comfortable being the first person to seek a thing. And what ended up happening is I started looking at my weaknesses. Like, what don't I know? I don't really know how to communicate with other people. I'm very introverted. So how do I speak to actors if I'm an introvert, if I'm shy, if I'm afraid to be myself? You know, what is that going to take, and what languages do I need to learn? So I ended up going to an acting conservatory for 2 years, studying Meisner technique. And that's what really kind of turned me inside out, because I was sort of like, okay, I'm faced with the task of having to know who I am, what I care about, what turns me on as an artist, and being obsessive about it and retraining my brain to say, okay, we are going to learn this technique so that we can improvise in life, and we are going to practice, right? So that's what I did. I practiced and then met other people, other teachers, other community members that sort of led, one thing to another. And I think I was very blessed to be in that program so young, because most of my peers were like 10, 15 years older than me. So it was also like I was learning from like a divorcee, or learning from like someone with kids, or learning with someone that like left a marketing career to be an artist. So then from there, I went and studied and took other master classes and started making my own work. Training isn't linear, just like life isn't. You just gotta, try, see what sticks. Throw some stuff at the wall. I was really trying to figure out if I couldn't go to school to be a writer. I write plays, I write screenplays. I just couldn't afford to train. Like, it's so expensive here to study different things. So my way of training was like, you know what, maybe I want to do comedy. Maybe I should just start doing stand-up and see if my jokes land that way. But I was terrified. But meanwhile, I was outside the club and me packing, and I see Tracy Morgan like on a BlackBerry. And I was like, y'all, that's Tracy Morgan. And the people I was with, they were like, I don't know who that is. And I was like, whatever. They were like, well, go say something. And I'm like, but it's Tracy Morgan. Like, and a BlackBerry tells you how long ago this was. So I go up and I'm like, probably like 17 years old, like not supposed to be at the club. But I was like, all right, I got to just ask, like, how do I get into this? So I went up to Tracy Morgan and was like, hey, Mr. Tracy Morgan, I really want to do stand-up, but I don't know how to start. And he was like, just do it. If you're scared, get a dog. And that was it. And I was like, okay. So here I am the next day looking on Craigslist, and I see all of these ads that are like, are you a comedian? Like, come do this show, blah, blah, blah. I go and I email this person and I'm like, hey, so I really want to do stand up. And I talked to Tracy Morgan and this is what he said. And then the next thing I know, I'm doing my first stand up comedy. I'm doing my first set. I literally did comedy for 5 years after that. And I was doing pretty well for myself. I wasn't doing a lot of open mics. I was, doing an okay time, but then I also wanted to study this Meisner. So while I was in that program, I had to decide, well, this is going pretty well. I can go on tour with these comedians, or I can stay and I can do this program to learn. As a kid, I was bullied so severely that by the time I got to high school, I was like, I don't even care. Honestly, you can say whatever you want to say to me. Most of the time, people were so unkind to me as a child for being Black that I feel like my skin got so thick that by the time it came to being out in the business, I know that some of my peers still talk about how difficult it is to be out in the business of entertainment or out at work in any field they work in. I just didn't feel that it was good for my mental health for me to shy away from who I really am. And I think that what I've learned in hindsight after 10 years, it's like I put in all this time. It's like, how many more queer films am I gonna make before people are, you know what I mean? It's like, I can't not be out. Like one person said to me today, like, I've noticed that wherever you go, even if you're the one person that is different from everybody else, you still treat everybody with respect and like care and kindness. And I really feel like a lot of that comes from being brought up with so many different types of people, with the understanding that everybody is equal spiritually, even if they're like a terrible person. There are so many people in the world where I'm just like, oh my God, why are you here? But then I have to check myself and be like, okay, but the instinct of being like, this person is so different from me, so I can't love them, or I can't share space with them, or that's just not realistic. There's something that we can all learn from each other. Everybody has a unique like gift and perspective. I think sometimes being open to people who are very different from you can be one of like the best qualities to have, because you're opening yourself up to learning and growth and like change. And I feel like you, at least in my experience of sharing space with people who are very, very different, I've noticed that those people maybe have never shared space with someone like me or someone who's a part of my family or chosen family. I think that our culture has really lost sight of what it means to be a community. I think that like we live in this country that is founded on terror and really teaches us that we need to subscribe to this age of narcissism or like mass individualism. Like that's what people are selling, right? And I think that when you get really curious, you somehow realize that like what they're selling isn't what you should be buying. And so when you invest your time and your energy into being open, the world opens up, because the more you know, the larger your world becomes. And then you kind of, you alleviate a couple fears about what you don't know and who you don't know. So the person who benefits is you and the people that you share space with. The power of the artist is very much undervalued. As you can see, we are on strike. Artists tell the story, right? But when you tell that story, then you have the power to influence our economy. You have the power to influence our culture. And by influencing our culture, you influence the economy, you influence policies that are created around, you know, our daily lives. I would be remiss to say two things. One would be there's a lot of spirituality in science, so we need each other, right? We need each other for everybody in this world to ascend to something that's more tolerable than the terror that we're experiencing right now, because I think everybody is going through it. We are in a crisis. Like this is a crisis. I don't care if people don't think that they're in it, they are in it. You know? Every voice really matters. And I think that, you know, there are a lot of artists that are making things like we have to be environmentally conscious on this set. And what happens when millions of fans see these people who are artists or influencers doing something because they're conscious about, you know, the impact that all of our previous mistakes have created for the future? You know, I think that's really powerful. I'm proud of the many times that I've had the privilege of working with other queer and trans people. And that's most of my career. I'm proud of the lifelong friends that I've made. I'm proud of, regardless if anybody has seen some of the things that I've made, that's irrelevant, because it's like I'm doing what I love. I'm doing it with people that I care about. And I think about Lorianne Hansberry like every day. It's like, was she appreciated while she was here? Probably not. But the work exists, and that's something that I am so privileged to be able to experience right here, right now, when her work is still very, very relevant. It's like being a part of the community is so important to me. And there are so many values that our community has that I feel like our core values are so important. I think what I would like to see is for all of us to be alive for as long as we want to be here, thriving. I also really want to see real care provided for our community, be it medical, be it, you know, emotional, be it like community support from people outside of our community. I would like our community to not be so politicized. I would like our bodies to be not so policed. I would like to see aftercare and self-care happening together all of the time. And I would like us to feel like we belong in practice. Everyone has everything that they need and then some. I can speak for myself. Like, I think we all want to provide that for one another. I think that's like our knee-jerk reaction. And I feel like a lot of the systems that are in place don't afford us that. So I would like to see us rest. I would like to see us just be. All of my spaces that I inhabit, I think that like everybody, for the most part, secretly loves queer people. Like, I think everyone loves us. I think they love seeing us at work. I think they love creating with us because it's such an integral part of our community to be open and to be supportive. And, but that doesn't mean that the representation exists. So I think that there are so many people behind the scenes that are constantly like pulling the strings and want to pull those strings, but aren't afforded the visibility that I feel like someone who's seeking needs in order to figure out how to lay down their own track, right? So even today, it's very, very difficult. And I don't think that the representation that I long for exists. Most people hire you, want to be around you, or want to be in community with you when you're honest with yourself about who you are and what you stand for. I feel like that's one of the fastest ways to build community. So I think I wasn't conscious of it while it was happening. It's like, I want to make queer work because I want to work with other queer people and because I want to feel what my straight counterparts are feeling when they go to work and they feel seen and they feel appreciated and they feel like they're doing something important. I don't want to feel like when I'm doing anything in this life that I have to kind of like compartmentalize parts of myself in a way that feels at odds with my values. And I feel like we owe it to each other to be authentically ourselves wherever we are. So I'm sort of looking at things intentionally with a different approach, like knowing that if I'm creating queer work or if I'm creating films about queer, trans people, Asians, Black people, like these are things that I care about. But these are also things that I was yearning for at a certain time in my life. And there's power in making that visible because I think that mass individualism tells us, and the propaganda that we are constantly subject to tells us the opposite. It tells us that something's wrong, or it tells us, that there's something wrong with being different, right? But the reality is we're all very unique people. So I think that that's the power of really being an artist, being able to like shape the culture. And this is also how the greatest leaders have shaped the culture. You have to be in the process of learning how you learn. You have to ask yourself several questions, right? What do I want to learn? How can I learn it for free? Because now we have the internet. I hold a computer every day. And I think there's something to be said about asking yourself how hard you're willing to work. How important is it for you to get to this next step? What is it that you need to learn and where can you start? And it's not with other people. I don't mean that totally literally. I mean, it's not with other people in terms of like only you can do the work to ask yourself, what do I need to learn? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And really look at yourself and be like, okay, if you're like, I know nothing about this field, then okay, take an introductory class. You can't do that? Guess what? There's the internet. The internet. You can look at podcasts. You can sneak into school. I would sneak into NYU all the time and take classes. I would pretend like I was a student and I would go right in there. It was like, you want to learn how to pitch a TV show? Okay, you're going to sneak into NYU and you're going to learn. Because, you can do that. I have friends who taught themselves how to make film at the library. So I think we always feel like there's this insurmountable task of like entering this industry. You won't know unless you try. And you have to be very comfortable being the first person to do it because I don't know somebody who wants to have the career that I want to have. Everybody is unique. Everybody has a unique story to tell. Everybody has unique skills. And it's all about figuring out what your personal superpowers are. Community is so important, but also being honest with yourself about like your skills and your natural affinities for things. And if you don't have that natural affinity for something, like for me, it was like, I'm too shy. Like there's no way I'm going to be able to tell this person I want to do character-driven work as a director, but I don't know how to get them to approach this character in the way that I want them to, because I can't even open my mouth to speak to them. So I think it's like a certain level of like, figuring out what your specific recipe is for the life that you want to live. And also being willing to say some days are going to be hard and some days I'm going to fail. A lot of days I'm going to fail. But when you're young, that's what your teen years, that's what your 20s are for. Fuck it up, throw shit at the wall, make shit with your friends. Nothing has to be so precious. Just because we're the first to do something doesn't mean that we have to be great at it. We have to be perfect. And I just kept being like, oh my gosh, like I didn't come to this acting school to learn how to be like a fantastic actor. I came to learn how to communicate with people. And every single day I was falling behind my classmates because I didn't know. And I had to be okay failing at it all the time. You have to be okay with like making a really bad film, because otherwise, if you don't have anything to tangibly look at and be like, oh, okay, even later on in life to be like, I made this mistake. Oh, I wish I had known that then, but I'm so glad I did this because I can see how I'm growing as an artist. And then how do you apply what you learn to the next thing? Even though I fell flat on my ass, doing this project or working with the wrong people or working with the right people and embarrassing myself or doing this, it's like, what did I learn about how I engaged with that work? What did I learn about how I engaged with other people? You're always self-taught. Everybody's approaching the work differently, but you have to know how you are approaching life. And you also have to ask yourself, what is life asking of you in this moment? And a lot of times, you only learn those lessons when you've fallen flat on your ass and you have to figure out how to pick yourself back up. And that's not tough love, that's just life. When you're looking for mentors, when you're approaching mentors, just the same as you're asking yourself these questions, what do I need to know? What do I need to learn? How can I get this basic information? Get that basic information. And then once you're looking for that mentor or once they appear, because they will just appear, you don't have to like always go searching high and low at some networking event to get what you're looking for. You have to have tangible needs. So you have to say, hey, I'm looking for a place where I can buy a new camera, an affordable camera. That is a specific ask. That's like opening a door for somebody to be able to help you. And then also just like stay really curious and be comfortable not knowing things. Always check your ego at the door. Nobody is that great. We all want to be great, but like we're human, we're flawed. We're not always going to be great, and that's okay. So just, I don't know, be curious about people that are vastly different than you are, because there's always something that you can learn. And I think that like as a community of humans, we all belong to each other, and we have to remember that first. And in order for you to recognize that, you can't have ego. I think that if I were to go back and say something to my former self, it would be like, your voice ought to be heard. And I wish that I had been a little more confident in my ideas and in my questions. I didn't know how curious I was until I started opening up and asking those questions. So I just wish that I would have used my voice a little bit sooner. My advice to young community members is don't block your blessing because you're afraid. Get really, really comfortable with failure, with being afraid. Like, get comfortable with that, because we all are, right? You only have this life in this moment. So I would say, like, don't take your days for granted, and be really, really clear in your boundaries, your emotional capacity, and prioritize your own mental health and self-care, because without it, it's going to be very, very difficult to do adult life in the society that we live in.